Welcome to YouTube Masterclass. This is Dr. Sheley teaching Film Criticism 405. PhD from CALARTS, MFA from the American Film Institute, Bachelor of Arts from University of Southern California. I'm teaching this class for USC, CALARTS, and of course I did also pick up a Harvard PhD. These were degrees, most of them achieved honorary academic, where you meet the academic standard, but you also meet the honorary degree output of the standard of the degree. But alas, that so many degrees are commuted in an institute, which reserves more degrees for the degree itself, which isn't to say it's any easier to get. But I'm just laying out how hard a program like that would be, and this film criticism level is pretty high. We are dealing with a lot of things that even deconstruction seems to come from a cultural high point of the academic standard. And so I would say that I'm going to get right to it, that this is a class that can be for if you see all the classes in a semester, and we'll do our best to demarcate how the semesters interweave. But if you see 16 of the classes, you can get 4 units if you talk to COURSERA, who are also connecting us to the YouTube Masterclass that this now is. So we're talking about the searchers today. Now, I don't know if any of you have noticed, but a lot of people say this is the great film. This is the master film. And this is really the master film, but there's a few things we've got to look at today which may actually lead more people to be Searchers fans than ever. And that is, it's almost like this Searchers code that I've unleashed in the last few days studying this, and that is that there's a backwards message to look at the Searchers that is really intended for what the film is supposed to be. That, in fact, John Ford had stated in his books that the Native Americans, who are portrayed as Indians in the film, are actually the protagonist, and the cowboys are the antagonist. And that's what John Ford proposed. And that, like everybody knows, it's open-ended because it's more on the side of the utopia of the last Native Americans who are going to have the wives. Now, to play it backwards, we realize that Ethan, the Indian that's Native American, is called a breed on both sides, or some dirty name that should never be used, especially because genetics prove that can't be true, and we should all be more representative of each other than that. But that this film has racial slurs, I would not any doubt that those were of not just Don Quixotic, but of Django Unchained metaphors, that in fact the racial slurs in this do in fact curse John Wayne to go forward into the back of the film, backwards. But when he dejects a curse upon an Indian to wander forever between the winds, that's exactly what happens to John Wayne at the end of the movie. He leaves the door and wanders forever between the winds. Why? Because he cursed that Native American while he shot him, and that guy wasn't even responsible for killing a girl that he said he saw get killed. But we look back, and that girl was already put into her grave when the other girl was picked up by a Native American, who David Bordwell says, and Martin Scorsese says, that when she picks up the little girl, it's ambiguous as whether they're taking her out of danger because they think she's going to be killed too, as some kind of shot had hit some of the others, and nobody was sure what was going on. In the original attack that was called in by the general, who was played by Ward Bond, who had called in that Indian attack, even though he forgot that, or knew that there were children within reach of that, and they came blazing, and they were too outnumbered. It all heads down to the one fact that John Wayne is so in love with money in this, that he keeps raising the bounty on a bounty's head, and then takes the bounty down. Is like a stakes idea. But what's great about it is that it totally makes up for a Fistful of Dollars version of The Searchers, which is where he raises money in the good, the bad, and the ugly, and all three shooting down the very person he's raising the stakes for, and that their death would actually compile in seemingly like only money-ridden, but that he does good deeds for other people isn't really focused upon in The Searchers, whereas John Wayne goes crazy from his normal persona of being regular, everyday, good, gentle mannered. Now we've got a Howard Hawks component of, do I make Red River the even more right-wing version, which is where you take the stereotypes and move them into the archetypes. And sometimes I said that can be a good thing, but that can also be a bad thing, because then we still have a reserve of leftover kind of feelings that we had for the connotation of the things we're now archetyping or mythologizing in this kind of grand West. But remember, what mythology is defines our language as much as we break down language and demythologize it. Now, that this film is demythological is because John Wayne plays against type, and I'm not decrying that feeling. I'm just saying we've all been going for it from the protagonist way, which is an okay way to look at the film, but really, I mean, if John Wayne is losing it to the point of not knowing whether he's going to keep his daughter alive and that the Indians, Native Americans keep her alive, is more showing that later in the film we realize Ethan got at least one bride at his own wedding, even though it was a kick-out boxing match. And that Ethan got another bride that was an Indian lady that may someday turn out to be okay. I think she went back to the tribe and wasn't really his anymore. And then there was Debbie. If they saved her, would probably become his wife in a way, because everyone had that culture. Now he's got the 3 Indian wives of the Overthrow Scar, which the Overthrow Scar was fair and square, except for that Scar was coming back to surrender. That Scar was coming back to surrender. I never really understood, but that's how it went down. That he was coming back to surrender and then he was caught before he could surrender is really strange, and that they finally realized that after 5 years of those guys looking around, that they were in it for more than just the money, perhaps, and that's why they all boiled down to laying down their curtain for John Wayne when he got there. Plus, they figured if he'd followed him for 5 years, he was going to catch him eventually, especially if they were fake retreating. So they may have boiled one over on themselves, but ultimately, like, it doesn't matter because the final scenes are ambiguous. Everything's seamy, like the 1950s seemed to be. It comes out of the clouds of showing how thick it can be as a movie, and then all these movies compare it to, like, the Odyssey, and it is like the Odyssey, and it has this kind of near Iliad effect at the beginning of it, but it's really the Gone with the Ship to the Odyssey, and the Odyssey is gone for like 7 years, and the Flying Dutchman is gone for 7 years before they can look for a lover. So 5 years in movie times is still a time that we're looking through this film through the eyes of it. It's happening over a set of 5 years in these beautiful, like almost stained glass compositions of beauty and focus and grandeur. And the last we're doing is decoding John Ford's ultimate way of getting civil rights across, that he wants the Indians to be the good guys, but this film is demanding that he stretches out his original Iron Horse expansion of the super Western, where we play over the parts where the natives get down, whereas this becomes the whole Apocalypse Now of revenge ahead of time, where he's headed back to get rid of the source of what is at the heat of the rest of the debate, while meanwhile he doesn't even know if he wants to take his daughter back until the last minute, or his niece back into the family, until he can realize that he too is beyond savage of the Indians and compared to how staunch this search has made it seem. So I'd still rent this movie 4 stars. That I don't really understand why some of us even get this kind of cathartic, or I don't know, just this yearning expanse of the being an old Western and being, scrummed up in boots and everything. I love that, but I don't understand that, like, we would get a kick out of being implied above another race just because we watch this. Because really, the thing is every time he speaks out a racist word, he goes crazier and crazier. It was like what I was saying with Hateful Eight. You know that that's what the villain would do, and we know that if they're cheering at all, they've got to be like chilling with the villain because they're on the villain's side. But the movie has this strange tide of attracting you to the side of the villain. I don't know if that's ambiguity or John Ford's way of tricking us, or maybe because the cloister effect of it all has gotten into us, and we're like, maybe now that I've seen this film a few more times, I'm starting to see why the Native American perspective wasn't so bad compared to the drastic nature of the other side. But the other side still seems appealing because it's the right thing to do to follow the cowboy, and a film about the searchers. Well, that's true too, because actually we all realize he has to wander between the winds no matter what. Like he's casting that curse upon the Indian, but we realize that John Wayne goes wandering the winds to who he was. Now, there's other breakdowns of circuitry within the movie that where you just sit back and say, now we're realizing what he's talking about, because there is even a peace pipe passed between Scar and Ethan, and that Ethan says he's going to join the rest of the Native Americans that don't die in this bust that they're going to run with, that Ward Bond's going to run. So he's giving them a head notice that they're coming, even they were going to retreat soon and give back Debbie, who doesn't want to go. And then later in the film, when he's talking at the end, he's like, I'm going to go with these Indians and we'll retreat, just like he said he would. And that means a lot of them live from the strike. And I think it's interesting that his wife that he married was like a Native American fighter, but in the movie an Indian fighter, that like a wife of an Indian that was going to help him fight his battles. And it's really interesting how that's all slipped in there, but I'm not going to make anyone feel uncomfortable by it going the other way in the movie. I'm just saying it looks like it is another way kind of movie, and that like they're on this road adventure with Threshold Guardians, we must say, is a sturdy, straightforward. But that it's progress, it must be straightforward, and that once their home base is challenged and destroyed, we're saying like the Iliad, then the home is sought for again by restoring it to what it once was, if you could make it to that agreement with what it once was. And that like the Searchers takes this whole stance that the home will not be complete unless restored to its nuclear physical structure, and that like the systematic family urge to see the Searchers is because all the units are represented, even though the girl unit is almost eliminated, although the uncle and his friends and his future wife or future husband are all going after it, and like everybody's getting trapped and thwarted. There are scenes where the Indians do damage in the film. There are scenes where they're trying to get the best of them, but the point is that the savage imagery in return is part of the reason that the Old West thrives in our memory, is because John Wayne went like outside of his domain in his mind in the film, not for real, of course. We know we can't go insane for real on a John Ford movie. That John Wayne was all at the center of John Ford's movies is totally correct. That John Wayne is his actor from the days of the 30s when John Ford pulled him out for the Stagecoach film. That Stagecoach is a huge box office of the 30s, is all part and parcel to the eventual arrival of the Searchers, which does have a Stagecoach unit in it in one of the films, I do believe. But the point is that like to play it backwards, I think is the right way to play it, because if you get me wrong, I think that there's a lot of bloodshed in the movie, all because that Indian scout or Native American scout was called out in the moment at the beginning of the film that there were children present. So that could have been the whole thing that really kicked off the whole obliteration of half or whatever it was their tribe that we're all guessing at on a low number. So supposedly what broke out originally was probably not worth the rest of the remainder of the total devastation of everybody, but that he searched for his soul is the point. But that at the wage of whatever was devalued and destroyed before him was noticed. And that's not like saying we don't completely go to the dark sides of our souls when we're eliminating the thing before us out of self-defense, that we must. Come on, we know better than that. But that he's not only doing it in self-defense, but in reverberation, restoration of the family code, the family unit, that Debbie is ultimately restored before the film is over to the family unit, before John Wayne does this whatever wander between the winds and comes back for another movie where he's wandering between the winds again, because we know he comes back in more of the John Ford narratives, like Two Rode Together was James Stewart, but that John Wayne was back in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, for instance. And that the John Wayne movies go back to She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, or Fort Apache, or Rio Grande, the trilogy, the Cavalry trilogy that we've known and loved that Cavalry trilogy of John Wayne is totally amazing. And the only other movie is Red River, that's Howard Hawks, that shows John Wayne losing his cool. And that he's not just losing his cool. These movies could be called What Would Happen If John Wayne Lost His Cool? And that John Wayne loses his cool. We love because that became the cool way of being, not just because it was uncool of what he did, but everybody knows they're above everything if they're cool. And I think that's cool because I always call things cool that I don't think I'm above, that I think that's cool because it's a little bit above me or more above me or way above me if it's cool. You know, even though some people have dared call me cool, it's not the same thing. It would have to be from a reliable source, you know, but not cool like it was playing it during the Rebel Without a Cause times, but that he's playing the bad guy good is a very fixture of what Clint Eastwood would do with his career. Not that Clint Eastwood is comparable to John Wayne. I'm just saying that they have similar plots within their westerns that even samurai films coincide with, because Kurosawa liked to do the searchers in his films, like The Bad Sleep Well, and that he did the searchers in his film Ron, which was a later version of Hamlet that he was produced by George Lucas and was a Kurosawa. Those were different versions of the searchers that Kurosawa did that I want to say Kurosawa's Idiot wasn't out until 1960, so that could be another version of his searchers because they're traveling across by train. That everybody does their version of the searchers is interesting. I've done like a sci-fi version myself, but it's kind of a low budget one. I shouldn't have brought it up. It's not that important, trust me. But the searchers is, whoa, it's a really big duster. And we're going to take a look at what makes it dust, because if you think about it, we see the cinematography of Monument Valley, and it's totally imposing with these unpassable rocks and unpassable destinies and futures of tomorrow, and that they've got to find their own daughter in all this land they've scaped out, and some of it's even theirs, and that like interviews come to them in the second half of the film that folds into the first, because they're always asking questions about where they are and getting journal entries 3 years after they've already been to the place where they say they've been in the journal entry, but it demarcates it through journal entry. And it's like this whole aftermath of the Civil War where John Wayne and his cohort Ethan Edwards, who is part one race and part another, part Native and part Mexican, most likely, or part Native and part American, is obvious, but that he goes on becoming the supposed sidekick of John Wayne. Doesn't make sense that they do have to kill so many people, are doing favors to the underground in Mexico who give them Mas frijoles, por favor. And sorry for that crashity of the accent, because that's what it sounded like in the film, the crashity of the accent. Is kind of planned ahead, and I'm not saying the film was trying to go down as a Blazing Saddles, but there's a little bit of pastiche that takes on mild humor in the film, like when the guy rears the guy with the sword in the ass. It's kind of funny because he knew this whole thing would come back to sting him in the ass. And that's what's funny about those kind of films without karma, is that like they set out to see if they're the ones that had the karma, and then when John Ford realized that he'd already had done good humanitarian efforts, you might as well do one more. Cable us into the stereotypes of the future Western, except one thing. He meant it overboard. He meant it like excess. He meant it like this is the groovy way it can all go down. And I don't know if they'll see this as an apocalypse now, but what we have is an apocalypse right now, because he didn't say those words exactly, but he's like, this is the end of everything Old West. If they see this, they'll never come back to the West again, John Ford says. And I said, well, I'll never come back to the West so beautiful, because that was a good portrayal of how, like he said in the same interview, the natives are the protagonist and the cowboys are the antagonist. And however they take the ending, which it's for the pro and anti, that's the confusing part. The search is on for everybody. And that means I hope they take it that way too, because very few of us will see that that's the pretext of the film, but I hope they take it that way. It's a beautiful thing to think of the searchers in that way, even though over-codified texts do still, at heart, have problems, because by the time they're saying these words, they balloon up into really sharp things against people that may be sensitive. So is that the way to get rid of an undersensitive code? Is by devising it. And possibly, yeah, you could possibly take a code off the measure by reaming it out so many times and knowing that everyone heard it a million times, that you're not offended anymore. But if you're offended, believe me, you might not be in the context of who's the villain and who's not. And I think we all can tell, even if he's not the villain the whole time, which he is. But even if he's not, we can tell the things he's saying are villainous and are somewhat undermixed by these searchers. Like, nah, we don't need to worry about the undercodes of the layers of the searchers. We're just going to go through and accept it for face value, even though we haven't quite understood what the search is supposed to be. The search for inner self, the search for, like, long time standing with your friends, for your inner self. And then you go and you search and you find something bigger than yourself and you can't explain it to anyone. And these are what the searches are supposed to be, but that he's actually searching for a member of this family, which family components are now in the 50s all of a sudden described as to look upon the mother, father, daughter, and son perfection of the family unit, whether it has these Oedipal missions, which in this we have this interesting kind of lower than thyself Oedipal learning from why we go on odysseys, other than the Oedipus kind of convoluting the Iliad. We remember that the Iliad and the Odyssey are the two most strategic myths throughout, that the other movie where John Wayne loses his mind and by this we said has a mental infraction or a mental disability for a while, is Red River. And trust me, John Wayne himself was saying through these whole shootings and was asking if they thought he went too far, and they were very fascinated by how well they thought his acting was, John Ford and Howard Hawks. And in Red River, we have another example of what is more like an Odyssey text, like the Searchers. But in Rio Bravo, we have an Iliad text, and that's a Howard Hawks film. And Howard Hawks didn't always do the Western. He also did, like, Scarface in the 1930s. And so we can see the Searchers as being specifically kind to a movie about the family narrative that comes about even in the Rio Bravo sanctioned off home domestic kind of setting. But even though it's the jail in Rio Bravo, and the Searchers where we have John Wayne roaming the desert forever. So The Searchers plants me eventually as kind of the film that I get that is very right-wing because it's pro-religion, right? Because it's pro-Native American, if we take that view. Or very right-wing because we take the view that the bad guy's got a gun view is, like, not always the worst thing that could happen in a John Ford film, but that he's got a sidekick who actually this time is greater than him is an interesting John Ford ploy. That the man who shot Liberty Valance would say who the legends really are about, and that's okay because we don't really know who the one that shot him was. I'd say The Searchers ranks up for one of all those time great films, and I think all those that have picked it just because they've seen it the way through it, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. If you want to go through it the way through it was originally made, or how you think it was originally made, that's fine. I just want you to see that there are these possibilities that the filmmaker has programmed into the film that make it fascinating. Fascinating to think that it was actually the looking for the lost soul and finding that the Native Americans were the lost soul. And that's why we killed them off. But let's talk about something funnier. We got some time left in class, so I'm going to either let us out of class early, or, which I probably will, because I've been torturing you with these long examinations of film, and sometimes we get too long, and I felt that the Searchers one could have gone on, but it just seems like we killed our soul at the end of that film, and it's a rite of passage movie, and you really should look at it from the opposite point of view. If you think he wasn't trying to make it from an oppositional point of view, then I don't think he would have called it The Searchers to try the trailhead home and the trailhead ahead and back and forth as much as you can get ahead. Because The Searchers is amazed that you can remake into an Apocalypse Now kind of movie and you're still running money gold. If you remake The Searchers, you're pretty much doing what film school would always tell you to do: analyze the scenes in The Searchers and the beauty of the trick slicky plot, and you'll be into it with movie making skills. That The Searchers is the one everybody copies by John Ford to get in with the in crowd in that Red River. And Rio Bravo can stand up to it. The Searchers will never die, and it's one of the great movies of all time. And let's hear it for The Searchers now. We're going to get a little funnier here because we got Satyricon. It's Fellini Satyricon, and just holding this box is so freaking obnoxiously controversial. Because it would seem like this box is going to condemn me to the gates of morbid hell, which actually, if you read the back, it says, if you're truly ready to watch this, it will condemn you to the gates of moribund hell. And really, that's why I had to watch it, because I wanted to see what that was like. And since I'm really not sitting here and that I'm in the gates of moribund hell, means I've probably seen Satyricon and that no one is hearing this at all. Can you hear this? Nope, nobody's raising their hand. All right, good. Nobody's watching this, so check this out. This is still probably my pick of the best foreign film I've seen, because I'm telling, and that pretty much makes it one of my favorite, if not my favorites, because look, if we're talking about foreign films, I can't think of one that's way more over the top than Satyricon. That no one will admit that it's the end of all neorealism and all absurd majesty, realism, and all the fantasy of Italian film that had been cutting through realism anyways, and that they do this one realistically, but not according to St. Matthew realistically, which is a documentary reel, that this is strangely like a Greco-Roman theatrical realism is one of the poetic things about this film, that it's all die-hard modernism, bric-a-brac scraping through, and that the whole thing starts when there's an earthquake in Rome, and that the narrator's predicting the earthquake is already absurd, and that everything's in Latin or Italian is unclear because sometimes the Latin will overcome the Italian. And yeah, I've only seen the subtitle version, but I can match up some of the lyrics. And the music is all this brilliant, bright, like bleary, like explosive effect with the soundtrack, as Fellini always does. And then we're coming right in. I mean, that's why they showed this picture here, is because we're coming in right on in focus rack and subsequent shots that are taken as a wide angle lens would attract something up close and make it look even closer. And then you tilt the frame under, and they're always above the frame. So now they're framed from a low cut, in view, up close, and totally protruding, like almost 3D dimensional over the audience. And then if you pan and track that shot, you get all these heads that are all coming over the play, like how a play would be seen by Fellini, but or all of us would prefer in Greco-Roman times, because we've never seen anything like it. Excuse me. Excuse me, class. So here we have Satyricon. The whole thing starts with a Roman earthquake, and that people are falling off this earthquake, and they're getting crashed over this earthquake. Is happening all throughout the movie, but really only 3 times. So whenever the narrator mentions an earthquake, there is one in the film. It's pretty impressive how they're already showing the fall of Rome from an earthquake perspective, is how it all goes down. And this is during the time of the fall of the Roman Empire. And I think this is supposed to be the character that plays Nero on the cover, I'm pretty sure, on this cover, Satyricon. That I can't really go into the story, but it was so hard to track this down and recover it. This is the 4th time I think I've recovered this film, or 3rd time. But trust me, owners of films, some films, especially like say Menace to Society, which I haven't replaced, it still would be worth it absolutely more than once and a million times to reorder it. But if it's rare as Satyricon and you lose it in some kind of a bar match, that can be part of the destiny of the film for you, but you don't really share that with other people, because you can sometimes if it's a regular story, but you know if it's the times you lost Satyricon and got it back, or the time in between it takes Minutes to Society get back, is going to be a story that's bomb as hell anyway, and why I never got it back versus why I somehow got it back can be just as good of a story. So really, I'm not judging anybody that loses their old movies, but if you've seen me with this one, you know that's not the last time. You know that's pretty much the last time I'll have to replace it, because this time I'm not really expecting anyone not to have it by now. But no, I'm kidding. But so there's a Minotaur maze in this I want to discuss throughout the film. There's all these verses of the Satyricon, which is actually from $1 Million Dinner, guessed, and all these other fragments of plays throughout the Greco-Roman. Horace was writing some of the Satyricon, and Petronius was really in charge of Satyricon in the Latin era. And Petronius wrote Satyricon in fragments, and the movie splices between two events really rapidly throughout the film because it's part of the fragments of the film, of the book that it was based on, Satyricon by Petronius. That Fellini has used these fragment approaches, but not to define a book, may have been more designed than perhaps seen before, because Fellini was actually looking for ways to probe the agency of conduct by showing us scenes that went from one to the next, whether they were backward in time or forward in time, usually forward in time by an advancement, like we'd seen in 2001: A Space Odyssey, that this film does it too, in really unusual contexts. Now makes sense in this film, but the earlier ones were probably based on a certain fragment or intentional fragment mode, or just had their own fragments of fragments by total coincidence. And that's one of the raging things about even the script of this film. No one knows whether his film would have been fragmented or not, but that doesn't make the original fragments any lesser than the remake. And then you're sitting there thinking, well, we're not going to totally reconstruct it the way it is, but we'll make it our own, because this is Italian neorealism. They made fun of satirically into Italian modernism, and that the new age of modernism is here before our very eyes is quite contextual. So, now that we've covered all that, I just want you to know that I still think the Minotaur sequence is interesting, for one thing, about Satyricon that we're lingering on for a while until we can really dial this in, the Satyricon. Is that what makes this a great film? Not only its fragments that jump between context and time and space and two narrators, is that there are times in this film that invites you into the film. Like there's the scene where there's a river in the distance that leads to a little pond stream in the foreground, and that an art critic kind of gets freaked out and has to have a cigarette by the pond, and goes and sits down by the pond and lays back on the pond, and there's someone else that's laying down nearby, and he says, "What do you see?" And he's like, "All I see is poetry and motion, and lights and shining armor." And he tells him these beautiful things he sees while he's smoking the cigarette, and you can kind of see one of your friends or yourself being in that part of the movie and just looking back, and he's like, "But I see the stars, the galaxies before me, And they're both, "What do you see when you dream?" And they're kind of holding this conversation at the pond, and it's like, that's a really good place to put that, because I really need to relax by a pond, smoke a cigarette, and talk about the relation of the universe and sky and time and mind, at that time, to even relax from this film. And so you kind of have to go into the film and do as it commands. And then that you wouldn't really need the real thing in front of you. It's more than the real thing. It's hyper real. We're bringing the real to an extended form, exaggerated in an existential expressionism. Yeah, I think so. And so we follow the story of two gentlemen who are from the Greco-Roman Empire. It looks like they're pretty good actors for the part. The actors that play them, they're bisexual, but one of them is homosexual and wants the other one for himself. And so they eventually hit on a kid that's younger than them, that it's done kind of in a pushed forward way. Even now, it doesn't bother me, because they're going after the kid, and he's younger than them, but they're all of age, like in our society, so it's no big deal, right? So that eventually the one who's jealous doesn't get anything from it, and that's kind of his result, but that he goes on to do great things is kind of the result of all mythology. While the one that's lightened up and the kid kind of dissipate into some kind of ending where nobody knows what really happened anyway. But that there are females in their life throughout is true, and that makes it a sensuous film. And around the time of Caligula, they're still making films off the grid that are a little more cooler, a little more shrewd in the way that they blow up a narrative into a big train wreck aesthetic, but it's also a perfect view of how the aesthetic goes in this film. And it's not a joke to say that this is one of the greats of all time, too. Satyricon seems to be kind of an Iliad situation, that there is an Odyssey on a boat. There's only a trailer to the Odyssey on the boat. We have kind of an Iliad film here, because we're all trapped in the city, in the polis, while it's decaying, while the earthquake's hitting it, while nothing's making a sense. And we've got this kind of 1984 thought crime thing going on with the film that will be seen later as the reason to use those wide-angle lenses like they do in Brazil, is to show the hierarchy of the power structure while trying to bite the hand that feeds it. Doing so and still forming your own power structure as a director in Hollywood and Italian film, to say none the least, is a beautiful description of the classic movie Satyricon. That if there was a scheme for all the cutting in the film, it looks like it's bracket narrative syntam. And by cutting, I mean montage, because mise-en-scene can be montage if it's several mise-en-scenes on top of each other. There's still montage between each mise-en-scene, as they're not, but the mise-en-scene of a montage is a different time to explain that, because what we're saying here now is that mise-en-scene all the way through even has a beginning and the end, so there's still an element of montage with all mise-en-scene. But if montage relies on mise-en-scene, even a blank screen is mise-en-scene. So yeah, montage always will, but it's lesser degrees depending on what kind of abstract formula it's following. Like say if it's an abstract formula of a person versus a thing versus the, not conditioned response, that's a terrible way to put it, but the response of the rapid eye movement of 24 frames a second, making it look like it's moving response, because we have that in our mental thinking, cognitive, cerebral cortex, that when we look at those films from that point of view, it looks somewhat plausibly real, except plausible not in ethics, but plausible in motion. We'll work on that theory. But, well, we have plenty of time left. We're going to go out soon, and we wish if you had any questions or concerns, we're going to have the final, I guess I better discuss, and this may take a minute, but the final is actually composed and is sent to COURSERA as what can you, if you're attending Film Criticism 405 and this is semester 2, you have to write a paper about what I said or what another book said is, what are the two forms of pure cinema? You just have to describe your answer. What are the two forms of pure cinema? Cinema pure, or pure cinema, or what is the form, or describe in detailed essay. Your essay only has to be a couple, 3 pages long, 2 pages long. Better chance of getting a better score with 3, maybe. If you write really well, it doesn't matter if you write really well, then COURSERA will accept them for a grade for the units of the class. If you have it worked out with your college that you're taking this course through them and that this is a COURSERA course, remember that in either semester you can get 4 units through them if you pass the COURSERA through their hashtag or whatever button you find available at COURSERA to get through to your college. Don't forget to do that. And that way you can get credit through that college with COURSERA, and COURSERA will let you do that if you discuss it with them. You may have to write them a letter. It will go through. I'm glad that John Ford made The Searchers. I thought it was a really excellent film, and that the movie that we were talking about so seemed to slip beside me, Satyricon, Wherever You Gone. I hope that wasn't another person grabbing it and running. But it's, oh, here we go, Satyricon. Yeah, don't lose that. No, nobody's ever grabbed my copy of Satyricon and ran off. That's not true. No, I'm just messing around. This is pretty much the Iliad and the Odyssey of the This one's of the 50s. This one's of the 70s, if you can believe it. 68. No, 68. I was wrong, big time. So 68, we're having next to one that I want to discuss before today's over, because I think we should really up the ante and go for it since we have enough time. And I'm not going to have enough time to finish talking about this, but I really want to talk about this as a surprise entry to the rest of my class, because I surprised you with that final, and we're now all thinking, oh no, the lectures are over. But I may I'll probably attend a lecture by next week to seal off the end of the semester, but it's great that we're finishing so soon. I think that we should be maybe filming extra episodes just for fun, but we may not do that. We are coming back for summer school, and there's plenty of movies to cover left. We've lost a few editions of the shows, not really anybody's fault, just for whatever reason, we had to take down a technical difficulty. It was always what it was, and it was never to blame on the person that made the technical difficulties. It was just a happenstance accident, and hardly any of that revolves around what we're reflecting here in the film category. It's just things that happen around that are noisy or whatever in my room or wherever else are not planned. So things that go wrong with the technical difficulties are not always easy to kick back into gear, and I see what you mean by that. So the Bonnie and Clyde is another fantastic movie that came out about 10 years, 12 years after The Searchers, but was of the vein of The Odyssey indeed, because it's a road movie now. And now we go back to The Searchers and we're thinking, oh, that's a road movie too, because The Searchers is a road movie, that they're going on the run, that they have guns, that they're the outlaws, that they're looking for the natives. Yeah, they do have that in Bonnie and Clyde. That Arthur Penn is definitely the one to go against, even the John Ford kind of satirical edge of humorlessness to the humorousness and the satire of the idea that we all know that Little Big Man's Arthur Penn's big movie of 1970, and it's all laced together with finally those without a voice are given a voice. And I think that finally, because the Native Americans in The Searchers were shown progressively forward than perhaps even John Ford had in The Iron Horse, now we're at Little Big Man going, yes, you were right, the Native Americans were innocent all along, we should have known that. And then there's voice given to millions of people that really wanted to speak out for that. That Bonnie and Clyde is a setup for Little Big Man, not entirely that it's a setup for a big box office. Maybe didn't know it was going to make as much as it did. Would have still been as outlandish as it is. Well, outlandish in a comic strip way, decently. In a photojournalist shoot of a magazine, it's brilliant, because there's a scene where they shoot arresting a cop in a photojournalist way, and that they have a camera on the cop is very stolen from Natural Born Killers. And here we have The Lovers on the Run genre again. Wild at Heart is one of these. Natural Born Killers, True Romance, California, Gun Crazy, the remake of Gun Crazy, Fury, You Only Live Once. I mean, there's some Lovers on the Run movie for you that go out as long, but that you can name them without going all of the Lovers on the Run movies, like Badlands, for instance, that you can name them all is a good thing, but there's always room for more. If anyone can even pull one of those kind of movies off, and that Bonnie and Clyde is one of the seminal, if not the seminal modernist Lovers on the Run movie that there is, and that's why we rely back to whether Gun Crazy or Bonnie and Clyde, the seminal works in the maze of Lovers on the Run theory. And a lot of us would say that 1967 is the reason that color came in, is because of Bonnie and Clyde bringing color in. And I think that Bonnie and Clyde said we can do all things in color now, that we can do this, and that we all followed that that all filmmakers followed that into a trail of filmmaking, that they should do the color film, is because of Bonnie and Clyde and the color vividly that they got of it. Even by the blood of the people they're shooting, there is some to say that Bonnie and Clyde is now getting real with a voice that was not earlier told the blacklisted people. That it's a throwback to the Lovers on the Run, is because they're always the ones getting blacklisted, because no one likes to see Lovers on the Run, because it empowers women, for one thing, because they're usually the femme fatale. That makes them in charge, even if they go bad or good. And the Lover on the Run, the masculine detail, who is affected only by the needs of his, whether she be a femme fatale or not. fatale. And that's one of the strengths we open with to the Bonnie and Clyde seminar that we need. I'm kidding. But the Bonnie and Clyde Lovers on the Run comes from romance, poetic realism, maybe not modernism in montage. Well, this time the montage dictates forward movement and some slow motion and some through another small camera, millimeter motion, and even the final scene where everybody's getting killed in this kind of follow the gods sequence, that Gene Hackman's great in this film, and he'd been in a number of other roles that supported his career in Warren Beatty's same number of other roles, like Splendor in the Grass with Natalie Portman had come out years before, and that he's still geared to the era with all of his methodical and now his industrial age kind of manner from early 20s. And that Faye Dunaway does this kind of like silent film flapper, but that she's the femme fatale makes things interesting because now she's got the power. And all of these emotions are simmering into this film. And then you have Gene Hackman, and the way he dies looks like a news reporter counter, same as the ones where they tricked the sheriff into getting like putting a snake on him and holding him at gunpoint, in the same kind of trailer sequence as a box set. So these all Arthur Penn and John Ford and Fellini, these are the films I want you to see. These are the films that I got to get you to see. If it takes you forever to see Satyricon, fine. If homosexual parts of movies offend you, you don't see Satyricon. But really, don't take movie as a class, because you're going to have to learn about homosexual movies in class. So don't take movies as a class if you don't learn about that. But I'm not going to shove it in your throat. It's just present. I'm not going to be like, now you have to learn about this, but it's present here. So we don't really give a crap about those kind of things. So if you count that as liberal, fine, but we kind of count it as we respect everybody politely. So come on now. But I'm not going to require you see Satyricon for other reasons. Like, if you want to see a movie about homosexuality, go ahead. If that's not the reason you're seeing Satyricon, don't worry about it. I'm just warning those in case that would come up, because I've known that I've given exceptions to if they have a drastic reason that there's to watch not a certain type of movie. The only thing we don't have here is the illegal movies. If they're illegal to the government, we don't show them. And then I keep trying to make Reefer Madness illegal, and it'll be funnier as an illegal film, but then people will get in trouble for watching it. Some people like to make fun of it while they watch it. Oh, I'm in a double drama zone. Okay, that John Ford, Arthur Penn, and Satyricon, Fellini, or see another Fellini movie. They're rad. That's what I should have said when I said that. See another Fellini movie. See an Arthur Penn movie. And it's high time we all see another John Ford movie, and that we try to keep track of all the movies we've seen. They say if you see a film about 15 times, it's hard, and you're paying attention really closely each time, it's hard to forget that movie from context to context. That you usually only see the high points in the film is a certain register of our minds to see mostly the parts that have been represented to us throughout the film. And that since the searchers seem kind of backwards today, that Bonnie and Clyde isn't extrapolated on enough. Like, you have the press telling the media that they're going to make a sideshow circus out of this. Sugarland Express does the same thing, where they make a sideshow circus out of this Bonnie and Clyde interlopation. A word I invented. Interloping. And you see they're making mockery of the press, and the press actually redeems itself by making a mockery of the law, and nobody knows they're making mockery of each other. And Bonnie and Clyde have just created an avant-garde, anarchist movement against their captors. It's really interesting. I mean, it's an interesting film that they would take up such a strange version of all of these different narratives and demythologize them and decontextualize them. And nobody demythologizes the whole Italian movie unit than Fellini with Satyricon, because he's really getting in there and turning the gears of the whole city's collapsing this time, and it's about to fail. Who's going to make the next movie about Rome after I destroy it, or after Italy gets destroyed, or it's us knocking down old buildings and putting up for the new ones? Well, Masterclass, I really brought forward some rush of ideas, so you might have to rewatch this class a couple of times to let it sink into your head that we love cinema here, and we pick out good cinema. All cinema is good, but some are more of our preference, and that we enjoy that is really because film criticism is more about writing about art. I do recommend that you write positively about something you already like, because if you're going to have a movie example on Cinema Pure Final, that's the perfect idea, but don't drag a movie out that you don't like and say why it's bad, even if you have to go the distance and say that a movie that most people think is bad is good. Even if you went to the rebellious distance of saying why you think Reefer Madness has pure cinema aspects to it, I don't mind. You know, don't bring in a negative idea of someone for being different than you. Don't bring in a negative idea of why the film sucks, or that even that you could have made it better, because we want to focus on the things we like about cinema, and we know we all like something about it because cinema has already proven that it has 1 billion viewers. So if all 1 billion were to write about it, that would be the ideal, and that if all of us could read that, we would, but that some of us don't even like our views getting published, we respect. And for those of us that publish our reviews are showing even those who want to write underground and not for anybody to see, this class could be a positive for. That would be a really good idea. Not that you couldn't graduate into the real world of criticism on the internet and other mediums from watching a class like this and studying it. You could write for yourself only and pick up some sharp tips, and write for no one to even know you write, as film criticism goes, that everybody knows they have their own secret film journal and that they're keeping a secret unto themselves and don't have to admit it to anyone. It's fine by me too. That may be the whole reason to take critical studies courses for your own home journal, that you don't show to anyone. We all know there's a reason for that. But don't be shy to show COURSERA some of that you've done their test, and that you've had to jump through the hoop of that, because it's pretty easy. If you hear all the classes, you can get loaded to the bag with all your details. And I think we better go and quit while we're ahead. For this one time, we're going to quit while we're ahead, but we love you all, and we'll see you for one last class before the semester, most likely, unless someone buys me a pack of cigarettes, and then I'm just going to run the semester through till the summer. No, I'm just kidding. We'll be fine. All right. Love you, Harvard, USC, and CALARTS. All right. We'll talk to you guys next week.